recording. All right, so we're gonna start off with a real quick meditation. Chaim thought it would be a good idea, so we're just gonna do like 1 minute. Just try to keep your mind from wandering. Stay in the present moment. If your mind starts wandering, just say stay in the present, Ryan. I say stay in the present, Ryan. I say Ryan to kind of distance myself from myself. I heard people described. I listened to a psychology book where they're saying if you've undergone trauma and stuff, or if you're in a difficult situation, it actually helps to talk to yourself, which is kind of funny because a lot of people think if you talk to yourself, you're crazy. But just say you talk to yourself, you say, Ryan, stay in the moment, Ryan, stay in the present moment, because now you're distancing yourself from yourself, and it helps. I guess if things are out of control, to distance to step away from yourself, it's somehow it helps. It takes away the stress. So just if you start thinking too much, just be like, Ryan, stay in the moment. Ryan, stay in the present. Just say your name. How was that? Did your mind wander a little bit, or did it help to refer yourself in the third person? Feeling all right? What are you feeling? What's that? Expanding? All right, so you ready to talk about the quadrant stuff? How you feeling ready? Anything in particular you want to discuss today, or you want to learn about?
What is the did you watch Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
So warging, I believe is that what it's called? When Bran would warg into the three-eyed raven,
Mm-hmm.
or I don't remember what it was. Anyway, he is the one place and he could see another place. What how would you how would you map that? What is, and as well there's a book, um Animorphs, about animals transforming into humans.
Mm-hmm.
My question is the relationship between humans and animals, especially humans and dogs. How do you, how would, even what category would that fit in the quadrant model?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean exactly? What's the, how would that work?
So I'm thinking of a few ways that would relate to the quadrant model. One is, according to Aristotle, there's 4 levels of being. And there's actually a lot of Jewish philosophers who discuss this too. The first level is mineral. And if you think about it, that's like the first quadrant, but first quadrant is always mental, but it's hard to imagine how like minerals are would be related to mental, but I've heard people describe like crystals and stuff. They have like maybe the highest consciousness there is. So I guess the first level is mineral, according to Aristotle. The second level is plants. And if or it's like vegetal. I think call it vegetal. And I think that like mushrooms and stuff would be included among that. And then the third level is animals. So second quadrant is always like homeostasis. So when I think of like plants, I'm thinking of, they keep the world functioning well because of the whole oxygen carbon dioxide interchange, and that's kind of essential for like the maintenance of life. And also like the mushrooms and stuff, they break down dead animals, and this kind of like maintains balance within the ecosystem, whatever. And then the third level is animals, and animals would be the doers, but the third is always bad, because animals are basically the third quadrant. The first quadrant is instinctual. Second quadrant is like magical. So remember, it's like magical religious consciousness. First level is instinctual consciousness. First level is sensation, perception, response, awareness. Second level is belief, faith, behavior, belonging. Third level is thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming. Fourth level is contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. So I guess animals would be in the thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming. They're just like animals, though, are just about action, or they eat each other. It's like a constant struggle going on in the animal kingdom. And there's a lot of, if you look at the animal kingdom, it's kind of grotesque what goes on. Like, or I wouldn't say grotesque, but there's a lot of violence, think about like the hyenas attacking the lions, and then attacking the herbivores, and then biting their their testicles and ripping them out, and a lot of nasty stuff's going on in the animal kingdom. So those are animals, and it's just like survival of the fit, just trying to survive. And then according to Aristotle, there's a fourth level, and that's a human. So the fourth would be, now that's the contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. That's rational, transpersonal. So humans, the difference between humans and animals is humans, I guess, have the capacity to transcend that the just primitive mindset of just like survival of the fit and kill or be killed, and they can get into the flow. The flow is like connection with God. What was the that's one way that the animals, you could look at it through that. And then there's another one I wanted to talk about with Joseph Campbell. He described that religions kind of go through 4 stages, and the first stage was it's called the way of the animal powers. And that was when, like, so we were talking about religion yesterday. So there's science and there's religion. Science is more mental. Science is first quadrant. First quadrant is always mental. And if you think of scientists, like, they seem smart, they're very intellectual, and they use big words. and they try to define things, but also it's kind of weird, and it's kind of like, oh, so the universe came through a quantum fluctuation, and it sounds like they're smart and stuff, but at the same time, it's kind of like these guys, it's strange. That's the nature of the first quadrant: sensation, perception, response, awareness. You can't really trust your senses and your perceptions, but it's a mental. Sensation, perception is all mental. Then you get to belief, faith, behavior, belonging. That's the second quadrant. It's like, it's more magical. This is a religious quadrant, magical thinking. And so originally when humans started, according to Freud, humans were walking around and it's overwhelming, and the world is too difficult because there's so much going on. It's so dangerous. It's scary. So in order to help make it manageable, that you have to come up with theories about what's going on around you. And the first humans, they believed that there were anthropomorphic beings in everything, like controlling the clouds was Indra. Like the Hindus would say, the clouds is controlled by Indra, and he's a god, and you have to placate him. Or for the Middle Eastern people, the clouds were Baal. There's people who worship Baal. They're worshiping the clouds. They want to get rain. And then you saw in the Bible the Tetragrammaton kind of trying to usurp Baal worship. In the case of the Hindus, it was Indra, and you also see a kind of subsuming of Indra by the Om, Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, where they kind of denigrate Indra and they kind of look down upon him. But they used to worship the clouds, and they there was a god behind the clouds. There's a god behind the sun, that's Surya, and there's a god behind everything. But anyways, according to Joseph Campbell, there's a moon god. For one interesting thing is the Israelites, when they went to Jericho. Jericho means Yariko, or comes from the word Yariko, and Yarik was the moon god of the Canaanites, and that's who they worshipped, and that's where Jericho comes from. And then they conquered Jericho. But according to Joseph Campbell, the first stage of religion, though, was the way of animal powers. So the myths of Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, which focus on shamanism and animal totems. So I guess if you look at the shamanistic cultures, you see a lot of times they'll dress up as animals. Like they'll dress up as bison and stuff, and they'll do their dances, and they get into shamanic trances and stuff. And I know, I remember learning about Rashi. Rashi believed that Adam and Eve, I think it was like Adam wanted to have sex with the animals first, but then God created Eve. And maybe that's like a reference to animal worship, or like totemism type of thing. Maybe that's like some sort of metaphorical, allegorical thing for, I don't know. But regardless, that's the original type of religions, according to Joseph Campbell, was animal totems. And even in the Bible, though, I think there's a reference of God being like a bull. And remember when the Israelites, they create the golden calf. The Hindus, like Shiva rides on a bull, and you kind of worship the bull Nandi. Vishnu they all have vehicles. All those gods have vehicles. So like Vishnu rides on an eagle. Shiva has a snake around his neck. So the thing about animals is, the way that I see it is, it's not like evolutionary biologists will say, yeah, they just evolved to perform well in their niches and stuff. But I see everything as it's like in a platonic way. Everything emerges from the quadrant pattern. So within the animal kingdom, within everything, you're going to see the quadrant pattern being revealed. Just one way you could look at that is like there's 4 trophic levels in the animal kingdom, and the 4th just stuff like that, where nothing's random. But I see like animals as platonic forms in a way, and everything's a platonic form. And I think that's kind of what the original people were doing when they're worshiping, when they worshipped everything, because they recognize that everything is like an eternal form, an eternal, like, it's a necessary aspect of existence that isn't just a random occurrence. It derives from the quadrant. So everything is kind of divine in a way. But yeah, so they worship the animals. Then the second level was the way of the seated earth. And this is in the midst of Neolithic agrarian cultures, which focus upon the mother goddess and associated fertility rites. So you see that in a lot of religions. They originally worshipped like the goddess. You see that in the Israelites where they kind of like worship Asherah. And kind of moving toward the desire to worship her. And then like in the Hindus, they worship Kali, or the goddess. There's four main denominations of Hinduism. One is Shiva, Shaivites. One is Vaishnavites, so Shiva worshipers, Vishnu worshipers. One is the goddess worshipers. And then there's the Smartists that worship 5 gods, but the 5 gods they worship, they put them in a quincunx pattern where they put 1, 2, one at the top left, one at the top right, one at the bottom left, one at the bottom right, and one in the center, making a cross, making a quincunx, a cross of 5 elements. So you see the quadrant kind of revealed there. But they tend to worship Ganesha, who is the god of wisdom. So again, these are like eternal qualities, and they emerge from the world of forms. The what are they called? The Gnostics, they worship wisdom too, but they call her Sophia. But for the Hindus, it's a Ganesha who has an elephant head. And that's interesting, an elephant, right? Because these animals, they have qualities, they represent things, like they're kind of stereotypical qualities that these animals represent. Like an elephant represents wisdom, probably because it has a big head, and it's, I get, it's a smart animal. They protect, elephants will protect their dead elephants from vultures and stuff. And I don't know, I guess their features, they kind of make people feel like they're wise. But then like a snake has certain qualities where they're predatory, and that's why the snake is always like, Satan's connected with the snake, and Satan is arrogance. Satan is the planet of Venus, and Venus rises high, but then it falls, and it looks like it goes under the earth, so it looks like it goes into hell. And that's, and the original people, when they saw something fall under the earth, they didn't know that it was going, they didn't know the world was round. Still, people question if the world's round, but they thought that it was going into hell. And so that's why they say Venus or Satan, Shukracharya in Hinduism, is the ruler of hell. But anyways, he's associated with snakes a lot. Hell, there's a lot of snake imagery because snakes go under the ground, and the ground is also like it's connected to materialism. Like that's where the gold is and the diamonds, and we know that leads to greed and strife, and you see a lot of stuff like that in religions where they connect, and a lot of that is also connected to the goddess. So we're going back to the goddess. The goddess tends to be connected to the earth. So like in Hinduism, the earth goddess is named Bhumi. Earth is a goddess. It's kind of interesting. In Egypt, though, it's not a goddess, it's a god. Earth is a god and the sky is a goddess, but that's like a little bit different. Different religions have different ideas in some ways, but usually it's a goddess. And that's what he's talking about here. So the way of the seed earth was a second stage of religion. And it says the myths of Neolithic agrarian cultures, which focus upon the mother goddess and associated fertility rites. If you look at like Greek religion, a lot of that has to do with like a lot of those Greek stories with the gods kind of overpowering the goddess and moving away from goddess worship to the feminine worship to the god worship. The gods tend to be connected to the sky, which is like ethereal and kind of transcendent, but the goddess is more material and physical. And if you think about like a woman, maybe that's because the woman becomes pregnant and she has a baby, so that this is more like physically based, and almost like she's entrapped in the body, whereas a man, not as much, I guess. But we know that a lot of these, like in Hinduism, a lot of the stuff is you also want to venerate, like you don't want to look down upon women, you don't want to look down upon anybody. So because not every woman is material based, not every man is like has transcendental consciousness. But regardless, you see in like the Greek religion moving away from the goddess worship. So like there's this stuff in some of the, I'll just like give one example where Medusa, she gets her head cut off by Perseus. Perseus is a son of Zeus. So the son is always very related to the father. So when you think of Perseus, if he's a son of Zeus, he is Zeus. And so he is the sky god. And he cuts off Medusa's head. Medusa might represent kind of like the goddess. But at the same time, I don't know who Medusa's father was. So, but I know that she was raped by Poseidon, who's the ocean god. But anyways, you do see a lot of movement away from goddess worship. And also a lot of times, like in Greek culture, they'll associate people who worship the goddess more with people from like the Middle East or people who they look down upon. And there's also a conflict between worship of the sun god and the cloud god too. So like the Greeks worship Zeus, but the Turkish people more worship the sun god Apollo. And you see that kind of conflict in the Argonaut and the Argonautica, where the Argonauts, who are the more Zeus worshipers, they go and conquer the Helios worshipers, the sun god, the Titan god worshipers in Turkey. And you also,
Right.
But anyways, that's the second stage. Third stage is the way of the celestial knights. This is the myths of Bronze Age city-states with pantheons of gods ruling from the heavens, led by a masculine god king. So that's what we were talking about right there.
What were the first two stages again?
The first stage was the way of the animal powers. So I guess they kind of worshipped animals. The second stage, they worship the mother goddess. Third stage, they worship the male masculine god. And that was when city states emerged. And remember, third quadrant is always connected to like physicality and violence and war. Like it has a negative quality to it. That's always the nature of the third quadrant. And the second quadrant, people have a romantic notion that when people worship the goddess, it was a lot better. People were more peaceful and it was nicer. The Minoans apparently worship the goddess, and we see Theseus in the Greek stories, he conquers the Minoans. So the Minoans were trying to get tribute from the Greeks, and they would have to kill like seven Greeks every year, and they would feed them to the Minotaur. But allegedly, historians say that the Minoans were goddess worshippers, and the Greeks were god worshippers. They worshiped Zeus mainly, who was the sky god. So, but you see, and then the Greeks conquered them, and the Minoans were wiped out. So that's moving away from the goddess, and then you move toward god worship. And then the fourth stage is, according to Joseph Campbell, the way of man, religion and philosophy as it developed from the axial age, in which the mythic imagery of previous eras was made consciously metaphorical, reinterpreted as referring to psycho-spiritual, not literal historical matters. This transition is evidenced in the East by Buddhism, Vedanta, and philosophical Taoism, and in the West by the mystery cults, Platonism, Christianity, and Gnosticism. And maybe
I don't
even
understand the difference. I don't understand why 4 is ahead of 3. 3, the way of, I don't understand. 3 is the male worshiping the male god is in my mind that's 4. That's the final stage of unity, father. No.
So according to Joseph Campbell, he sees that as the third stage is like hold on one second. My grandma's calling. Hey, grandma, let me call you back in 1 second, okay? So he thinks that the way I see it is like the fourth is always more abstract. So you're moving toward the third is more warlike, and he would look at it like, I think that he would probably look down upon the Bible, because he would say like, look at the Israelites, they worship a male god, and then they go conquer people and kill people, and then there's all these like people with different male gods, and they say their gods are better, and there's a lot of war going on. This is city states, and a lot of bloodshed. And
Hi.
but then he would say, but then people moved away from that and they moved more toward a more philosophical, the fourth quadrant, where they're like, well, maybe it's like they're looking at things more metaphorical. So it's like maybe God is not a male, but maybe it's more like energy, or more like, the not, I guess, Gnosticism, or like Pythagoreanism, right? Like it's like more like numbers, or like maybe it's the Tetrachus is God. Like the Pythagoreans worship the Tetrachus, and that's 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, and then 4 dots at the bottom, make 10 dots in all. And people think
1
that that's
dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots.
like in bowling. If you look at the pins in bowling, it forms a Tetrachus, where you have 1 pin and then 2 pins behind it, and then 3 pins behind that, and then 4 pins behind that. And that's what the Pythagoreans worship. The Pythagoreans said that that was God. So, but like these are like I guess moving toward the mystery cults, and I guess trying to glean like deeper understandings. It's more philosophical. So, but you see, the thing about the fourth is it subsumes the previous 3. So like, I guess that they could maybe even say, like, the Gnostics still believe that God is a man. They still believe in, they call him Barbello or whatever, but they think that he's evil. And then they come up with like different philosophical ideas, and why you shouldn't just like worship a patriarchal God, and stuff like that, or Platonism. Like Plato, what Plato did was a lot of his stories were centered around Socrates, and Socrates kind of replaced the old gods. So he would make Socrates like the old gods, and he would make stories with Socrates in them that reflected the old gods. Like he would do things in the stories that were similar to what the gods of their culture did. And somebody who was really versed in their mythology would recognize that. So what Plato was kind of doing was he was saying, let's move away from worship of these gods and move more toward philosophy, because I guess they believed that the worship of these gods was limiting or something.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So you started off by speaking about mineral, plant, animals, and human, and those fit into the four. So I'd like to ask about mushrooms,
Mhm.
and about qualities within each of these 4 stages of life: mineral, plant, animals, and human, the drive within each of them to cause destruction. Because the mushrooms you mentioned has a quality to them of being, they're decomposers. They bring things back to the earth, and that's a positive. It's positive, but also it doesn't exactly fit, and that's why mushrooms have a strange category within plant life, right? They're not exactly plants. What are they? Fungi, bacteria? What, I don't know. But the question is, do you see with mushrooms, what mushrooms do, is that also evident at other levels of life? Is there an equivalent of mushrooms? We spoke last yes, whenever it was, we spoke about, you spoke about a virus.
Yeah.
Virus. And I was wondering what the relationships between a virus and a mushroom, or what is that quality? What is that?
All right. So when we think about like mushrooms, just going back to like how it relates to the quadrant stuff, would be, the way I look at it is, mushrooms, you eat them and they can like bring about these higher levels of consciousness. Now, I see the quadrant in everything. This is what the whole quadrant model is about. It's a supernatural. We're living in a supernatural world where this fourfold pattern, which I think is God, this pattern, the quadrant pattern, it's going to reveal itself everywhere. So one example of like a mushroom that you can eat, it's a fungi that can give you these higher levels of consciousness, is psilocybin. And psilocybin is basically there's a quadrant in it. So it has a phosphorus, and then there's an oxygen above it and oxygen below it, and then an oxygen to the right and a HO, so a hydrogen and oxygen to the left, making a quadrant. So a lot of people would just be like, oh, whatever, but I don't think it's not a coincidence. It's because God, the quadrant pattern, wants to express itself in everything that is significant, or in every realm. Now, not everything about psilocybin is a quadrant, right? So someone might say like, well, what about the other part where it's like a four-sided thing? But that's the thing. You always have to, with the quadrant pattern, you have to like take a broader perspective. But regardless, yeah, mushrooms, I guess there's mushrooms that can give you these types of experiences. There's plants. I think there's even some animals where you can like drink stuff from a toad that can give you like psychedelic experiences, or like some people use cat piss, I think. But the thing with that I kind of see with that, how that relates to the quadrant stuff, is Aristotle says there's 4 senses. There's actually like 11 senses, but Aristotle says there's 4 main ones, and he relates them to the elements. So like the eyes, seeing is water, hearing is, air, and then the main ways. He says that taste is not a sense, because he said that taste is touch. But the way that so the way that Aristotle delineates them, it makes a quadrant pattern, and he connects them to the 4 elements. But the way I look at it is the 4th quadrant sense is taste, and the 4th quadrant can lead you to higher levels of consciousness. And we talked about the 4th quadrant is contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. And there's a quality of like sex where it's related to eating. Knowing is connected to sex, like in the Bible where it says if you know somebody, it means you have sex with them. And also there's a relationship between like sex and food. And that this gets deep in it. I don't really know how to explain it super well. It takes a while to explain it, but like it's like becoming one with something. You eat it.
So this goes back. Is this related to the question that I brought earlier about having, like, with it's Jon Snow, how he wargs into Ghost as Wolf, right?
Yeah.
Remember, he would
Right.
go across the wall. So he
Cool,
warg into this connection of consciousness between humans and animals can be, in a way, it's more abstract. But I'm asking if this is the same warging, the same unification as when someone eats something. When one eats a mushroom, does one take on the consciousness of the mushroom? And now one, so basically, to eat a stone would be to take on the consciousness of the deepest parts of reality. But stones, we can't eat stones, right? We can't get there. That's why we're only limited by being human. We can't get to the level of a stone. But so a plant, a mushroom is like the king of the plant kingdom, and to eat the mushroom is the highest level of the animal kingdom.
So one thing about mushrooms is there's four eukaryotes. There's 4 kingdoms of eukaryotes. Now originally I thought there were 3, but again, it's a 3-4 dynamic. So mushrooms is one kingdom. It's a fungi kingdom. Now I got the 2nd quadrant because the way I see that, fungi is their homeostasis. It's like they break down dead matter, and it creates order, stability. Remember, that's the 2nd quadrant is religion, which is like order, stability, and also conformity. But the animal kingdom is the 3rd quadrant because there's 4 kingdoms. The third, and they're the doers. The plant kingdom is the first one, the 1st quadrant. And the way I see plants is like plants, they take sunlight. And the first quadrant sense I see as vision. The 2nd quadrant, because that's related to the occipital lobe. There's 4 lobes of the brain. Occipital lobe is connected to vision. The temporal lobe, the 2nd quadrant, is connected to hearing, and also religion, which is interesting. So the religious part of your brain, apparently, according to scientists, is in your temporal lobe. And that, to me, that's not a coincidence. It's because the second quadrant is order. And if you even look at the ear, within the ear, there's these vestibules that make you balance. They create balance. So hearing and balance and religion, those are all connected. That's a temporal lobe. The third lobe is a parietal lobe, and that's a action. That's where action is. Like that helps us movement. And that would be the animal kingdom. And then the fourth lobe is the frontal lobe, and that would be, this is a weird one. Originally, again, they thought there were 3 kingdoms, but then they discovered, no, there's this 4th kingdom, the protists, and they're unicellular organisms. But yeah, plants are interesting. Fungi is interesting. And I'm trying to think, like, why would the fungi in particular be so powerful that has a psilocybin? Like, so if it's a second quadrant eukaryote, second quadrant is like, maybe like it gives like religious experiences. I guess that people take it and they can like, they can interact or interface with like, with higher dimensional beings like aliens and stuff, or angels and stuff like that. Maybe that's the reason why.
Do you know how to grow your own mushrooms?
I know a lot of people who do a lot of mushrooms. I would go to places and like, I used to hang out with hippies all the time. And I never have actually done any drugs. It's kind of crazy. I've never tried mushrooms. I've never tried marijuana. I've never tried anything. And the reason why is because I feel like my mind works really well, and I don't want to do anything that will hurt it. And maybe if the quadrant model gets big, I'll try at some point, but I want, like, at this point, I'm like, my mind's working well. I discovered the theory of everything. I don't want to like take a mushroom and somehow go crazy and then it never takes off because I, lost my mind. And I've seen people who have done mushrooms and stuff and lost their minds, but I have nothing against people who do. I think it's fine. But for me, I just feel like my brain is working well, and I want to just keep it that way until the stuff gets